Hello everyone, this is a very long video compared to my usual ones, but this is because it's a recap. What I mean by recap is this will have every single country that starts with the letter A, because I have made a video about the simplified history of every country that starts with an A. So, enjoy the history, and that is an extremely long video. Enjoy. Hello everyone, I'm Kenneth, and I'm starting a historical geography series where I make a research and edit video about every country in the world, alphabetically. And the first one, alphabetically, is Afghanistan. So this will be a brief, simplified history of Afghanistan. What we call Afghanistan currently started in 1823 with the Durrani Empire, which was the first sign of the quote-unquote modern Afghanistan. Afghanistan being in the middle of the Silk Road means they got a lot of money and population throughout time, and it may last. But they've had money and population for a decent time before all the civil wars and coups and stuff. The Durrani Empire is known as the start of the modern state of Afghanistan. However, nothing lasts forever. So the Durrani Empire collapsed like all empires did, and then the territory became many smaller, diverse Afghan kingdoms. Some Afghan cities now were the strongest states back then, like Kabul, Herat, and Kandahar. But like what we know about Afghanistan, civil wars are and were prominent in the region. From 1793 till 1863 was basically nothing but civil wars, which also made the area not wanted for future colonizing and invading. Muhammad Khan, who was the ruler of Kabul, hence why Kabul is the capital of Afghanistan. But then after he died, Afghanistan erupted into many civil wars. Once again, Afghanistan during this time, well, not during this time, I'm skipping a lot of the history, so we're moving on to like the late 1800s. Afghanistan held an important role of being right in between the rivaling British Empire and Russian Empire, which those two are always at their throats, and that's also why Alaska was given to the U.S. But I'll get to that in like a year. One of the two powers decided to get more land, like all empires. Uh, colonial empire, I'll add on to that. Colonial empires are very greedy. They just want more land and more resources. So the colonial one, which is the British Empire, decided to do a subjugation war on Afghanistan, and they took a huge L. What? That's embarrassing,
stronger
bro.
here. What are
That
you
is
doing?
so embarrassing.
What are you doing?
A massive L. They got destroyed. Then they did a second war, which they technically lost again, but they also technically won.
Huh?
They didn't win, but they didn't lose. The British, uh, the British were able to spread a lot of influence in Afghanistan, so Afghanistan was basically a puppet. So they technically won, but that didn't last long. The greedy British came in for a third time to fully get rid of Afghanistan, to which Afghanistan destroyed. Skill issue, skill issue, skill issue, skill issue, skill issue, skill issue, and gained full authority again. That's a skill issue. Skipping ahead another like 40 years to the important stuff, in June 1926, what at this time was the modern Afghanistan, uh, lived until 1973, going past many big wars like WW2, the Korean War, and stuff like that. And then and not 1973, the monarch was overthrown. So then a more democratic Afghanistan emerged, which immediately was gone in like 5 years in 1978 when a communist uprising took over, which the Soviet Union wanted a piece of that, so they decided to invade Afghanistan as well. And they lost brutally. The Soviets are horrible. That's an L moment. Skill issue. USSR more like you're scared, so run. That was a skill issue. That war lasted like 20 years, and when the Soviets withdrew their troops in 1989, they collapsed right after. That's a big skill issue. That was their reward. However, Afghanistan never recovered from the war and the civil wars and the communist uprising and everything. So they kept fighting amongst themselves. Then the Islamic Taliban controlled basically all the country for basically a decade when that war kinda ended, but it was still going on. And yeah, so the Taliban controlled basically all of the country for a decade. But then Uncle Sam invaded the Taliban in 2001. I wonder who that could be. This war technically did the last 20 years.
Skill issue.
Till 2021, which that's when it got
Skill
focused.
issue.
And in 2020 and 2021, the war became a very popular thing. Not to mention, the U.S. wasn't alone in that. Many NATO countries, several South American, like and African, Asian countries helped, and they dipped. The Taliban ended up regaining control of Kabul, thus ending the war and ensuring a Taliban victory. Albania is usually a kind of forgettable Balkan country, but today I will tell y'all the history of Albania. Albania, or what was known as Illyria, in 400 BC was a rival with Macedon. Illyria was very strong and managed to spread throughout the Balkans and even beat Macedonia a number of times, which we know Macedonia was very powerful and would end up taking a lot of land. However, a rising power, Rome, was an interesting foe. Illyria was dominating the southern Balkans and especially the Illyrian areas, so they had a fight with Rome and brutally lost. Gentius was the last king of Illyria, and Illyria got annexed by Rome in the 2nd century BC. Albania became a part of the Dalmatia, which is the modern-day Croatia, Macedonia, modern-day Macedonia, Dacia, which is modern-day Romania, and the Moesia Superior, which is modern-day Serbia, provinces in the Roman Empire. The Romans fell, and Byzantium emerged, and still owned Albania until they lost it to the Bulgarian Empire in the 9th century. Albania would trade hands many times to several different states, like the Venetian states, Serbian states, Turkish states, even Italian states, etc. Albania after was like Afghanistan, a bunch of small kingdoms who kind of coexisted and fought a lot. But then the Ottoman Empire emerged and took control of like all of the Balkans. Albania wouldn't get into independence for many centuries. Going even past like 4 or 5 centuries. They got independence in 1912 from Serbia, but they got independence from Serbia right after Serbia got independence from the Ottoman Empire, so it was basically just a chain of events. Albania would swap ideologies a bunch, which most countries did, but then in World War II, the Italians got control of Albania. We all know this, and it was not good for the Albanians. But then, like we all know, in World War II, Italy had an armistice, and soon after the Allies got side with Italy, the Germans would take over Albania and basically everything the Italians conquered. And we all know Germany, way bigger threat than the Italian Empire. However, we all know the Germans died and skill issue, and lost. And following the collapse of the Axis powers, Albania became a communist state basically under proxy control by the USSR. When the communists fell, Albania got thrown into economic collapse and social unrest, which led to an Albanian diaspora to neighboring countries like Italy, Greece, Germany, Switzerland, and Turkey in the 1990s. However, the modern ages, Albania has slowly been getting a better economic situation, slowly being getting stronger. Ever since joining the European Union and NATO, Albania has recovered a lot, but isn't too well. Because Albania currently is the weakest country in NATO and still has many problems, like with every single one of its neighbors. Bosnia is not in a good situation. Kosovo are Albanians. Macedonia hates them and has Albanians. Greece hates Albania. Albania has never really been in a very good spot. And that is a summarized history of Albania. Algeria is really only known for being in North Africa, but today I'm going to tell y'all the full summarized history of Algeria. The quote unquote modern history of Algeria started with the Numidians, which spoke Berber. That is still spoken today, of course, and is located in northwest Africa, controlling territory that is modern day Algeria, but also modern day Tunisia, with parts of those, Libya, and Morocco. The rulers of the Numidian tribes were split in between two countries basically, the east and the west. You have Masili in the east and Mazeli in the west. The modern history starts in the Second Punic War though, between 218 BC and 201 BC. Massinissa, king of Masili, beat the west side and unified the Numidian tribe. Small note, throughout the rest of this part, I say Numibia, when it is actually still in Numidia. So just telling y'all, because that is wrong. Numibia is wrong. The Numidian tribes as a whole, and the country is called Numibia, like Namibia, but with a U. The country went from modern Mauritanian border to a little past Tripoli, so about the size of modern day India, which is pretty big. They got in fights with Rome, of course, because who didn't? By killing some Roman businessmen that were going into Numibia, that sparked the death of this country. Rome ended up winning and took Jugurtha, which is the newest ruler of Numibia, and executed him. After being annexed by Rome, Christianity started to spread, converting millions and converting Berbers in the Algerian lands. But like I said it before, Rome dies, like all empires do, and Algeria became a part of the Vandal kingdom, which then got taken over by the Byzantines. But then the Umayyads in the near 11th century took Algeria over and spread Islam. The Umayyads didn't last too long as well, but there are so many Muslim kingdoms that took over Algeria. Just in general, from even a bit before the Umayyads and a lot after, like the Zirids, the Hammadans, and the Almoravids. The Almoravids did great economic work on the territory, but the Almohads took control over Algeria and expanded Islam into the Iberian Peninsula. That's how the Reconquista started eventually. The last main Wawanese empires to own Algeria during this time is the Abdulwahilids, who owned Algeria until the Ottomans came to take it. There are a lot, and also like late 1400s, Europe freed Spain from Muslim rule around this time. Spain had a history with Algeria, kept taking parts of Algeria and like Morocco and all this land, like Ceuta and Melilla, which they have modern day. And that was during the Abdulwahilids, and even during Ottoman rule. So Spain was taking bits from the Ottomans. The Spanish fights lasted until the late 1700s, like a bit after the United States got independence. During this time, apparently Denmark went to war with Algeria as well, but we don't really care. That's not main history. I just thought it was interesting. Back to the Ottomans, who owned a lot of land, to then lose it all, like all empires do. So that's a skill issue. Algeria was basically free until the French came in and colonized like half of Africa, including Algeria, which they really wanted to keep Algeria, mainly for oil stuff. But yeah, Napoleon is known as like the worst French leader and the most dictatorish. But Napoleon treated the Algerians better than any other French leader, which is strange. But Napoleon was still very harsh. Algeria got fed up with French rule and high nationalism, which only grew higher following both of the World Wars. But after World War II, a decade-long brutal war for Algerian independence happened, and France did not want to give up their colonized land. But at the end of the war, Algeria did get independence. And over the next few decades, follows every other African country, a bunch of military coups, and a bunch of civil wars. The latest civil war was from 1992 to 2019. And Algeria didn't lose. Now, Algeria is doing pretty well and is one of the strongest African countries, albeit being the biggest in land area, while having the population of Spain. That is all. Bye. Today I will teach you all the history of Andorra. This is my fourth installment in my History of Every Country series, so if you want more, make sure to like and subscribe, because I make one of these every other weekend, which that will probably get changed eventually, but I hope you enjoy. The land of Andorra was discovered in 9500 BC as a passing place between the Pyrenees, but that's too old for what I'm talking about. In the Roman ages, the land was influenced by Basque, Aquitanian, and Iberian languages, and the castle of the Roque d'Anclar is the oldest man-made thing in Andorra that is still here today. After the Roman Empire died, Andorra came under influence of the Visigoths, the Kingdom of Toledo, and the Diocese of Urgell. During the Visigoths, Christianity spread throughout Andorra, which you may think was from Rome, but Rome didn't spread Christianity through all of its territory. But Muslim invaders came through Iberia, which we know from the not Reconquista, just them doing their stuff, and the Franks saved Andorra from being a part of the Muslim conquest. Andorra was then a buffer state between the Muslims and the Franks / the rest of Europe for a while. Two states swapped Andorra back and forth for a century, but was resolved in 1278, which is known as its Independence Day. The Kingdom of Aragon had annexed Andorra back a decent bit back, but the Kingdom of Aragon let Andorra get semi-independence, being run by an Andorran leader and the French head of state, which is still active today. Andorra la Vella, which is the capital, got renamed and turned to be the capital. The second oldest parliament in Europe was founded in 1419 in Andorra also. Andorra adopted the Catalan language, which is close to Spanish, but it's in Catalonia, as you can tell, and Andorra, and which is their official language that is still that way today. France and Spain got unified by France and Spain, and were and are the only two countries to border and landlock Andorra. Andorra was just kind of chilling, like the Swiss were. They were just staying, lowering unrest, improving their economy, and vibing while Europe cut each other's throats for centuries. But the War of Spanish Succession, Andorra supported Catalonia for obvious reasons. I didn't even know Catalonia was in the war, but they were. And after the French Revolution, Napoleon took away Catalonia and Andorra. But Napoleon was actually the one, well, for the French Empire, was the one that actually made the colors for the Andorran flag. In 1814, the French Empire died off, as we know, and Andorra got its independence back once again. In 1933, Andorra had a lot of social unrest from the Revolution of 1933, led by some Spanish people, to which France would occupy Andorra until the problems are done. And I don't normally name people, but Boris Skystarev became the leader of Andorra, quote unquote leader, with his promise of freedoms and modernization of the country's wealth and more. But he had bad intentions and was arrested, and France kept a hold of Andorra throughout the Spanish Civil War, 1936 to 1940, and during World War II, Spanish and French refugees flew into the country and gave a big economic boost for Andorra, which also made the unrest go away, so France would leave Andorra back to its, well, whatever it was doing. And also, France took away their head of state, being leader of Andorra. Also in World War II, Andorra was neutral, but was a smuggling route between Vichy France and fascist Spain. In the capital of Andorra, there was a lot of pro-Axis propaganda being spread, which eventually got fixed near the end of the war. Andorra, after World War II, became a capitalist economy, like most of Europe and most of the countries in the world. They even reinstated the French leader as a co-leader of Andorra and took on what's called the Andorran Dream, which is close to just being a carbon copy of the American Dream, but it's not exactly then. Since then, Andorra has just chilled and stayed neutral in everything. Andorra nowadays is the biggest micronation in Europe, being like 100 times bigger than the Vatican. Andorra is very mountainous, of course, because it's in the Pyrenees. And Andorra is honestly just a cool country to visit. I haven't visited. I'll probably end up in the future. But that is the end of Andorra. Hello everyone, today I will be telling about the history of Angola. So, make sure to like and subscribe, and let's get into it. In this series, I talk about the history of the modern country. So like, with Angola, I'm not going to talk about the ancient tribes that, like, all the way back then. So, the modern Angola, before colonialism and stuff, was dominated by nomadic Khoi and San people. They were hunter-gatherers. The Bantu people from the north displaced them in the first millennium BC from what is thought to be modern-day Nigeria. Skipping a while, the political entities in the Angolan lands were established like the famous Kingdom of Congo with a K, which was based in Angola, funny enough, and controlled a decent bit of the DRC as well. It connected trade routes with kingdoms like Greater Zimbabwe and the Mutapa Empire, and it bordered the Kingdom of Dongo and the Kingdom of Matamba. But in 1484, the Portuguese arrived and set up relations with the Congo Empire, which the Congo Empire went from Gabon to like the south of Angola. Pretty big. Portugal set up the primary trading post at Soyo, which is the northernmost city in Angola today, not including Cabinda. A Portuguese a Portuguese person named Paulo Dias de Novias founded Luanda in 1575. Benguela was fortified and became a town/city from 1587 to 1617. That time is not. Portugal set up many other trade posts on the Angolan coast, and this is where Portugal got most of its slaves for the transatlantic slave trade, sadly. This part of the slave trade continues even after Brazil got its independence in the 1820s. Portugal didn't control much land in Angola. It is just a ton of territorial claims that Portugal has over it. In the 16th century, Portugal gained control of the coast, like all of the coast, through many wars with the Kingdom of Congo. The Portuguese Restoration War came and the Netherlands took control of Luanda and attacked the Portuguese holdings because everyone hated Portugal in that time. Portugal got Luanda back and beat the Dutch down, even taking Timor in Southeast Asia. The slave trade ended in 1836. Portugal controlled Angola as far north as the Congo River and as far south as Mozambique. Portugal also took over Mozambique and a few other African colonies in the time, and Portugal wanted to connect Angola and Mozambique, but Belgium and Britain already had holdings there, and they refused. The Berlin Conference set a set-in-stone claim to Angola from Portugal, which would last until their independence. In the time after World War II until 1966, Angola was preparing for a war of independence. But during the time in the late 1950s, a Marxist leader founded the MPLA, which is a popular movement for the liberation of Angola, near Luanda, a little bit north of it, formed as a coalition resistance movement by the Angolan Communist Party. Angola was in the war for independence, and in that, 3 rival nationalist movements were against the Portuguese. But they were also against each other, so it was a war for independence and a civil war at the exact same time. The Communist Party got support from the USSR and China to eventually win the war in 1975, unsurprisingly. Angola would stay communist and be the main African communist country until 1991, when they stopped communism and the USSR collapsed and they became a semi-democracy. Angola wasn't too much of a democracy though, and was still nationalist and a dominant party system to become a slight civil war. Cabinda wanting independence wasn't good for Angola either. Angola had a serious humanitarian crisis, and there was a drought that affected 1.4 million people just across Angola. Whenever the whole drought was in southern Africa as a whole, and probably killed close to 8 to 10 million people. That hurt the Angolan recovery even more. But more elections happened, and more leaders became present until the modern day, where Angola is a pretty strong country for Africa. Angola is the 22nd biggest country in the world, being double the size of France. They border the countries of Namibia, Zambia, the DRC, and Cabinda gives Angola a border with the normal Congo. And finally, Luanda is about 8 million people, being the biggest African city to not be a megacity. And that is about it for Angola. This is my 6th installment of my History of Every Country series, and it is Antigua and Barbuda. If y'all want to see more, which I'm going to do more anyways, but for the people who watch this, make sure to like the video, subscribe, comment your favorite part, or just comment if I should skip ahead to a different country. And yeah, so Antigua and Barbuda isn't much of a big or famous country. So for this history, I will do a little bit of a more stretches, like how the Native Americans found the island of Antigua around 3100 BC. However, to the modern history of Antigua Barbuda, Christopher Columbus found the islands in 1493, but the Spanish never colonized the islands. The English settled on Antigua in 1632, and the English settled on Barbuda in 1685. The colony was a tobacco place worked by a large Western African workforce. The English held control even after the French attacked in 1666. The slaves revolted in 1701 and 1729 and even 1736, so clearly they were not a fan of the English. Slavery was abolished in 1833 in the British Empire, which destroyed the Antiguan economy and purpose for the UK. The islands were also affected by many natural disasters constantly, like the 1843 earthquake and the 1847 hurricane. It was a part of the Leeward Islands colony, and when they gained semi-independence in the 1900s, they were put into the West Indies Federation, which consisted of most of the English Caribbean. Antigua became an associated state of the UK with full internal autonomy on February 27, 1967. However, Antigua gained full independence on November 1st, 1981, but they opted to stay in the Commonwealth. And Antigua's history basically stops there. So I will go over some facts and geography stuff. Fun fact, there was a colony in Antigua which was named Boggy Peak, but when the US President Barack Obama became president, they changed the name to Mount Obama until his reign ended. Antigua's capital is St. John's, and the most populous city on Antigua is Codrington. They are the smallest nation that starts with the letter A. The flag looks like this. They have a population of about 93,000, and that is about all for the history of Antigua and Barbuda. Argentina. One of the most famous Spanish-speaking countries, and probably the most in South America. Argentina is a very popular and famous country that has a lot of history, and today I will go over that said history in the history of Argentina. The oldest parts of the Argentinian state go back to the Incan Empire, which expanded into the northwest of the country in the pre-Columbian times. Europeans first arrived in Argentina in the 1502 voyage of Amerigo Vespucci. More Spanish navigators visited the territory in 1516 and 1526. Buenos Aires was founded as a settlement by Pedro de Mendoza in 1536, but it was abandoned in 1541. That colonization founded the colonies of Paraguay, Peru, Chile, and Rio de la Plata, which is now Argentina. Several cities were founded between 1553 and 1596 that are very big in Argentinian history. Well, more not just the history, but are very prominent cities in Argentina today, like Santiago del Estero, Londres, Mendoza, San Juan, San Miguel de Tucumán, Santa Fe, Cordoba, and San Luis. Also during this time, Buenos Aires was refounded. The Argentine territory was created as a viceroyalty in 1776, with Buenos Aires as the capital. The city repelled 2 British invasions in 1806 and 1807. Once again, Another British L. Ferdinand VII was overthrown in the Peninsular War, which started the assault of the Spanish-American states getting independence. July 9th, 1816, the Congress of Tucumán formalized the Declaration of Independence, which is now their Independence Day. The same war brought Chile and Peru their independence, just not the same day. The massive wave of European immigration they promoted in the late 1800s to early 1900s, second only to the United States, led to a near reinvention of the Argentine society and economy that by 1908 had placed the country as the 7th wealthiest developed nation in the world, which is crazy. Argentina had a near 15 times more population than it had before and had crazy high exports. Argentina was on the level of most European nations like Denmark, Netherlands, Portugal, Switzerland. Crazy. Between 1878 and 1884, the conquest of the desert occurred, which Argentina and Chile went south to double, if not triple, their territory and take the land from the natives that were still residing down there. Then, until 1983, Argentina would be in a lot of dictatorships and military dictatorships that would make Argentina slowly get poorer and less developed until, in 1983, they became a democracy again, albeit not a very good democracy. So until the modern day, they had more presence, more policy shifts, just going more towards a democracy, boosting their economy, and that is about it. And yes, I skipped the World War II section for a reason. Argentina now is the 8th biggest country in the world, ahead of Kazakhstan and behind India. Argentina has the highest mountain in South America, and Argentina has a population about similar to Spain, which is about 45 million. That is it. Goodbye. I will be telling y'all the history of Armenia. Starting. Armenia, as a name, the actual name of the country, came from the first time on an inscription where it mentioned Armani together with Evla in the current region of Diyarbakir, Turkey, way long ago, several hundred years in the BC, super long ago. But now to the actual history. The kingdom of Armenia's history started out with the Urartu, which was the first real country that held the Armenian territory in the 800s BC to the 500s BC, and their rival was the Neo-Assyrian Empire. Their capital was Tushpa, which is the modern-day city of Van in Turkey. In 714 BC, the Assyrians defeated Urartu. Later, the satrapy of Armenia arose under the Orontid dynasty, which governed from 585 BC to 190 BC. Many Armenians adopted Zoroastrianism. The Seleucid dynasty controlled Armenia next, and a lot more, but they lost to Rome. The Seleucids got reduced to modern-day Syria and eventually split into Lesser Armenia and Greater Armenia. Greater Armenia was the one to be stronger, hence the name, through since 95 BC to 66 BC, and they rule a lot of Caucasia, a lot of Turkey and Iran, and other countries there, thus forming the Second Armenian Empire. Armenia then lost to Rome like everyone did, but still lived and was an ally to Rome. But when the leader of Armenia died, Rome came in and took control of all of the territory. In 301, Armenia became the first nation to adopt Christianity, which furthermore enhanced the political rivalry in the area. They made a church that exists independently of both Catholic and Eastern Orthodox churches, which still exists today, and is one of the oldest in the world. Rome died again, so Armenia was split off into Byzantine Armenia and Persian Armenia. Byzantium defeated Persia, taking back most of Armenia, and established the full province of Armenia. The next big moment was when the Mongols invaded Asia and took the Caucasus, including Armenia. But this was good for Armenia. Let me explain. For Ar- it was good for Armenia since they since they got access to more trade and money and more political stability, which they built many churches, buildings, and stuff. So it was actually not that bad for them. But after the collapse of the Mongols, Armenia became again under the Persian rule, which this time was the Safavids. Western and Eastern Armenia were fought over back and forth between the Ottomans and Safavids. Yerevan, which is the capital of Armenia, changed 14 times between 1513 and 1737. West became under Ottoman rule and East became under Safavid rule. As the end to that. The Safavids died and the Russians took the modern Armenian state from 1828 until 1991. The next big moment for Armenia was in the First World War. But previously, in 1894 to 1896, and a separate time in 1809, the Ottoman Empire slaughtered waves of Armenians. But in 1915, they conducted the Armenian Genocide, and to put it short, they gathered every Armenian they could find, brought them to Ankara, then moved them to the desert, and massacred them. This was carried out before, during, and a little after the World War. The death count estimated is about 1.5 million Armenians. These events are traditionally commemorated yearly on April 24th for Armenia. The Ottoman and Russian Empire collapsed in that war, so Armenia had a brief independence between 1918 and 1920. But that was after the Transcaucasian Federation during the Russian Revolution, where they claimed independence and fought Turkey in the war, which didn't last long. Between 1918 and 1920, Armenia fought both Georgia and Azerbaijan. From land with Georgia and culture in the east. Turkey then invaded Armenia in 1920. But the Soviets beat them to the capital, and Armenia became under Russian rule again. The Armenian Socialist Republic lived between 1922 and 1991, and in the late 1980s, Armenia and Azerbaijan were having some tensions where a region inside the province of Azerbaijan called Nagorno-Karabakh, which is predominantly Armenian, wanted to join Armenia, but Azerbaijan responded with a big fat no. This was the start of the fighting between the two states. It enhanced furthermore when the Soviets collapsed and both Armenia and Azerbaijan gained their independence. Armenia on August 23, 1990, but the Soviets recognized independence on December 25, 1991. Azerbaijan and their ally Turkey closed their borders and imposed a blockade, which they retain to this day on Armenia, which severely affects their economy. But in October 2009, Turkey and Armenia signed a treaty to normalize relations. Armenia had many presidents, but that's a little lame because every country has. In April 2016, many border clashes between Armenia and Azerbaijan took place, and in September 2020, a full-scale war broke out during the two over Nagorno-Karabakh, and Azerbaijan fully annexed the region and made the Armenians flee to the main state. That is the history of Armenia. This is the history of Australia. Humans are believed to have arrived in Australia 50,000 to 65,000 years ago. The island of Tasmania was connected to mainland Australia until 14,000 years ago, when sea levels were rising. Now to the real history. Make sure to subscribe. There was a theory of Portuguese discovery in the 1520s, but it lacks evidence. The Dutch East India Company ship, captained by William Janzoon, made the first European landing in Australia in 1606. But that same year, a Spanish expedition sailing in nearby waters and led by Portuguese people landed in the New Hebrides and named the land Australia del Espiritu Santo, in honor of the Queen of Austria. The Dutch in 1616 made another expedition to Australia, and landed on an island off the coast of Western Australia. The Dutch kept sending ships to look at Australia and mapped out about the entire continent except for the east, and then never committed to making a full-scale colony. The first English expedition in 1688 and 1699 were in New Holland, and published influential descriptions of the Aboriginal people. In 1769, James Cook, on an expedition across the Pacific, wanted to go to the supposed southern continent, but they never found it. But Cook decided to survey the east coast of New Holland, which was the only major part to not be charted by Dutch navigators. In April 1770, Cook charted the coast fully and took possession of the east coast. The French were late to the party, and were the first party to encounter the indigenous Tasmanians, and to kill one of them. And they also claimed Western Australia, but never followed up on their claim. No country wanted to try actually colonizing the continent, except for Britain, and the government decided to establish a colony at Botany Bay, modern New South Wales. The American Revolutionary War saw Britain lose most of North America, and wanted replacement territories. Britain needed a place to send convicts, and that eventually led to Australia, so that's Botany Bay. Britain made the territory of New South Wales, which at this time was expanded and made up more than half of the continent, and the islands surrounding. This colony was then brought by many settlers, including hundreds of convicts, and Sydney was renamed. Sydney was founded around this time, from a dude with it as his last name. Soon the Napoleonic Wars started and ended, which meant that there were thousands of convicts in Great Britain that were sent to Australia, nearly quadrupling the population, and the population stopped being only around the Sydney metroplex. The New South Wales colony expanded and controlled every modern territory except for Western Australia. The settlement of Melbourne was established in 1837, and soon tens of thousands were moving there, and 5 million sheep. Because of this, the territory separated from NSW and became the colony of Victoria. In 1826, some British people didn't want France to get Western Australia, so the British quickly took the land and now controlled all of the continent. Perth was the only city basically in Western Australia, and Western Australia became its own colony, and it was the first convict-free. South Australia was established in 1836 and was a privately financed settlement-based colony which was little cost to the main British government, and Adelaide was made. Queensland was made as a secondly punishment to convicts centered around Brisbane, and were soon let free for the public. Between 1788 and 1868, there were over 160,000 convicts in Australia. In the early 1800s, the continent wasn't explored too much, so some people went out to explore most nooks and crannies like the Australian Alps. In the late 1800s, the colonies got semi-self-governments. All of the colonies in March 1900 voted to join into an Australian federation, and the government of Australia was proclaimed on January 1st, 1901. Funny enough, Australia's de facto Independence Day wasn't when Australia got unified or got independence from the United Kingdom, but it was when British explorers founded the colony of NSW in the 1700s. In the early 1900s, the Australian economy and population was growing rapidly, and in World War I, Britain required its colonies to send troops, and Australia, during an election, sent 20,000 troops. After the Russian Revolution, the few socialists in Australia formed the Communist Party of Australia, which did get some influence in the country, but was never given its chances to shine, thankfully. World War II was about the same as World War I for Australia, except they had to fight Japan a bit as well, because Japan invaded their part of New Guinea, which was the Papua province of Australia. After World War II, the population of the continent was 7 million, so they needed to repopulate. They made the capital city into a brand new city called Canberra in New South Wales, and it became its own territory, the Australian Capital Territory, separate from New South Wales. Australia allied with the United States around the Korean War time. There really isn't much else to say about Australia because the rest is just nothing interesting and just economy stuff. but Australia nowadays is the seventh biggest country in the world, about 7.6 million square kilometers of land, 26 million people live there, and an economy of over 1.5 trillion US dollars. And they still have their not very good flag, but hopefully that changes. So that is it for the history of Australia, except it's not. I saved one last thing. The last thing I'm going to talk about is the Emu War. After World War I, soldiers were given land for themselves and emus kept stealing crops. So in 1932, the Australian military was tasked to kill as many emus as possible to prevent them from stealing crops, which they did kill a decent bit. That plan was a failure. The second attempt was also a failure, and the emus won the war. A country lost to a bird. But the emus were kept out of farms by barrier fencing. But it's just funny how Australia lost a war to a bird. That's all for the history of Australia. Have you ever wondered why Austria has become what it is today? Well, today I will tell you that in the history of Austria. The area that is now Austria was settled in pre-Roman times by various Celtic tribes, having been the core of the Hallstatt culture by the 6th century BC. The city of Hallstatt, in fact, has the oldest archaeological evidence of the Celts in Europe. The Celtic kingdom of Noricum, that included most of modern Austria and parts of modern Slovenia, was conquered by the Roman Empire in 16 BC and made a province called Noricum, which lasted until the year of 476. After the fall of the Roman Empire, German tribes conquered and ruled the Austrian land for many centuries to come. But then in 487, most of modern Austria was conquered by the barbarians and incorporated into the Kingdom of Italy. After that, many tribes took over Austria because it was the center of Europe and has valuable land. The king of the Franks conquered the area in 788 AD and introduced Christianity as a part of Eastern Francia. But then they split into West and East, West being the future France and East being the future Germany and Austria. The first record showing the name Austria is from 996, where it was written as, I'm not even going to try to pronounce that, referring to the territory of the Babenberg March. In 1156, the Privilegium Minus elevated Austria to the status of a duchy. The Habsburgs controlled Austria for many more centuries to come and taking over a lot of land in the process, like the Netherlands, and soon after they acquired Spain and its Italian, African, and Asian and New World lands to the Habsburgs. In 1526, Bohemia and a part of Hungary came under Austrian rule, and the Austrians and the Ottomans had many conflicts, primarily around Hungary and the Balkans, that would last hundreds and hundreds of years. With the rise of Prussia, the Prussian and Austrian rivalry began in Germany. Austria participated together with Prussia and Russia in the first and the third of the three partitions of Poland in 1772 and 1795, respectively. Austria later came under war with Napoleon of France, which was unsuccessful in the beginning, and Napoleon killed off the Holy Roman Empire. 2 years earlier, the Empire of Austria was founded. From 1792 to 1801, the Austrians had suffered 754,000 casualties. In 1814, Austria was part of the Allied forces that invaded France and brought to the end the Napoleonic Wars. It emerged from the Congress of Vienna in 1815 as one of the continent's four dominant powers and a recognized great power. The same year, the German Confederation was founded under the presidency of Austria. Because of unsolved social, political, and national conflicts, the German lands were shaken by the 1848 revolutions, aiming to create a unified Germany. Austria and Germany fought Denmark to get the independence of the duchies of the two provinces that modernly border Denmark. I'm not going to try to pronounce. The Austrians defeated the Hungarian Revolution of 1848, and to prevent more unrest, Austria decided to have a dual sovereignty with Hungary, thus forming the Austro-Hungarian Empire. The Austrian-Hungarian rule of this diverse empire included various groups, including Germans, Hungarians, Croats, Czechs, Poles, Russians, Serbs, Slovaks, Slovenes, and Ukrainians, as well as large Italian and Romanian communities. As the second constitutional era began the Ottoman Empire, Austria-Hungary took the opportunity to annex Bosnia and Herzegovina in 1908. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand in Sarajevo in 1914 by Bosnian Serb was used by leading Austrian politicians and generals to persuade the emperor to declare war on Serbia, thereby risking and prompting the outbreak of World War I, which eventually led to the dissolution of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. Over 1 million Austro-Hungarian soldiers died in World War I. The German-speaking parts of Austria, which had been a part of Austria-Hungary, were reduced to a rump state called the Republic of German Austria. The desire for an annexation of Austria to Germany was a popular opinion shared by all social circles in both Austria and Germany. The treaties like the Treaty of Versailles also forced German Austria to rename itself as Republic of Austria, which consequently led to the First Austrian Republic. Over 3 million German-speaking Austrians found themselves living outside the new Austrian Republic as minorities in the newly formed or enlarged states of Czechoslovakia, Yugoslavia, Hungary, and Italy. These include the provinces of South Tyrol and German Bohemia. The status of German Bohemia and Sudetenland later played a role in World War II. After the war, inflation began to devalue the krone, which was the Austrian currency. In autumn 1922, Austria was granted an international loan supervised by the League of Nations. The purpose of the loan was to avert bankruptcy, stabilize the currency, and improve Austria's general economic condition. The loan meant that Austria passed from an independent state to the control exercised by the League of Nations. In 1925, the Austrian Schilling was introduced, replacing the krone at a rate of 10,000 to 1. Later, it was renamed the Alpine dollar due to its stability. From 1925 to 1929, the economy enjoyed a short high before nearly crashing after Black Tuesday. The First Austrian Republic lasted until 1933, when a chancellor, using what he called self-switch-off of parliament, established an autocratic regime tending towards Italian fascism. On March 12, 1938, Austrian Nazis took over the government, while German troops occupied the country. On March 13, 1938, the Anschluss of Austria was officially declared. 2 days later, Austrian-born Adolf Hitler announced what he called the reunification of his home country with the rest of the German Reich. He established a referendum which confirmed the union with Germany in April 1938. About the rest of the World War II, things could be said about every other country in World War II, so I will talk about the main other World War II things that include Austria in the Germany video. But resuming, Vienna fell on April 13, 1945, during the Soviet Vienna offensive, just before the total collapse of the Third Reich. The leaders of every group in Austria agreed to declare Austria's secession from the Third Reich by the Declaration of Independence on April 27, 1945. And set up a provisional government in Vienna under State Chancellor Renner the same day, with the approval of the victorious Red Army and backed by Joseph Stalin. The total number of Austrian military deaths from 1939 to 1945 was 260,000. The total number of Jewish Austrian Holocaust victims was 65,000. About 140,000 Jewish Austrians have lived in the country in 1938 to 39. On May 15, 1955, after talks were lasted for years and were influenced by the Cold War, Austria regained full independence by concluding the Austrian State Treaty with the Allies of World War II. On October 26, 1955, all occupation troops had left, and Austria declared its permanent neutrality by an act of parliament, which is the reason why it's not in NATO. This day is now Austria's National Day, a public holiday. The political system of the Second Republic is based on the Constitution of 1920 and 1929, which was reintroduced in 1945. Kurt Waldheim, the former Secretary General of the United Nations, was elected President of Austria from 1986 to 1992, following a referendum in 1994, at which consent reached a majority of 2/3. The country became a member of the European Union on January 1st, 1995. Austria is a member of NATO's Partnership for Peace, but not fully in, and Austria is in the Schengen area. That is about it for Austria. On to some stats and geography facts. Austria's capital is Vienna. They have a land area of 83,879 square kilometers, with a population of just over 9 million. Nominal GDP is 540 billion, with per capita being 59,000. Purchasing power party does not count. That is it for the history of Austria. Hello everyone, this is the history of Azerbaijan. The start of the state of Azerbaijan is one of the more recent ones in the area. Unlike Georgia and Armenia, whose country has existed for thousands of years, Azerbaijan wasn't around for a while, so the history will not be fully about that state. Let's go. The Azerbaijani parts of the Caucasian Mountains were very rich in resources, so the areas were at an all-time boom in the Bronze and Iron Ages. Alexander the Great conquered Azerbaijan, but after the fall of the Seleucid empires in Persia, the Kingdom of Armenia ruled parts of modern-day Azerbaijan from 190 BCE to 428 CE. The Arsacid dynasty of Armenia was a branch of the Parthian Empire and Caucasian Albania, which is present-day Azerbaijan, which was under Parthian rule for the next several centuries. The Caucasian Albanians established a kingdom in the 1st century BCE, primarily remaining a semi-independent vassal state until the Parthians were disposed in 252, and the kingdom became a province of the Sasanian Empire. The country adopted Christianity as a state religion during the 4th century, and Albania was a Christian state until the 8th century. The early Persian rule by the Achaemenid Empire enabled the rise of Zoroastrianism in Azerbaijan. Armenia and Albania were at each other's throats a lot until the rise of the Roman and Parthian empires, which split them both. Caucasian Albania was conquered and annexed by the Sasanian Empire in 252 to 253. Caucasian Albania was an ally to the Sasanian Empire, and when they fell to an Arab caliphate, he shifted his allegiance to the Byzantine Empire 3 years later. Next, the Muslims came storming through the Caucasus and converted and annexed everyone in their giant short-lived Rashdud Caliphate. But after that, the Sajid dynasty ruled Azerbaijan, to then be defeated by the Salarid dynasty, which were then defeated by the Shaddadids, and then the Seljuks. But the Seljuks are the most important to Azerbaijan, because Azerbaijan under Seljuk rule was helped shape the identity of modern Azerbaijani Turks more than anything else. Like Armenia, the Mongols came running through Asia, but the Mongol expansion was way worse for Armenia than it was Azerbaijan. The cities of Zanjan, Kazvin, Maraga, Ardabil, Bailagan, Barda, and Ganja, which were the biggest cities in Azerbaijan, were destroyed. The territories of Azerbaijan became a battleground between the Golden Horde and the Hulagu states. After the Mongols, the Chobanids dynasty ruled over Azerbaijan and many surrounding territories, but of course the Safavids took Azerbaijan like they did Armenia, and Azerbaijan, as a result of this, became the second largest population of Shia Muslims by percent after Iran today. Persia wasn't doing so well in the centuries to come, so Azerbaijan came under Ottoman rule from 1722 to 1736, and the rival Russia was very close in eyeing the Caucasus. Persia eventually got the Caucasus back, and after a few Russia and Persian wars, Russia eventually gained control over the Caucasus, but they had to change the lands from Persian culture, and this resulted in most people in Azerbaijan having little to no rights. The next big thing for Azerbaijan is the fall of the Russian Empire, to which they got the to which formed the independence of the Transcaucasian Federation, and the federation fell, and the Azerbaijan Democratic Republic was proclaimed on May 28, 1918. The party was named after the Persian provinces of Azerbaijan. The Soviets took the Caucasus back, and life grew worse and worse from famines and an overdose of work. Life wasn't great under Soviet communism. But Azerbaijan eventually had enough and proclaimed independence on August 30th, 1991, and became a part of the Commonwealth of Independent Nations. The First Nagorno-Karabakh War began by the end of the year, resulting in the creation of the self-declared separatist Republic of Artsakh, which persisted until 2023. The refusal by both sides to negotiate resulted in a stalemate, as Armenian troops retain their positions in Karabakh and corridors to Armenia, which recedes from Azerbaijan in 2020. That is the history of Azerbaijan. Time for stats. Azerbaijan has about 10 million people, with a GDP of around 80 billion US dollars. They have 86,600 square kilometers of land, and their capital is Baku. Bye.